there are not enough hours in the day to do this show, so we figured let's all put it on a Sunday night. So we have a lot to do, so I'm not even going to say anything. I'm just going to introduce myself and everybody else. I'm Steven Rabinowitz. You know that guy in the black shirt and in that Heinz Field-ish like place. That's Jay Kaplan. Joe Tufaro is here from his new owned bar and lounge. Looks very nice. Has the best backdrop out of all of us already. So welcome back, sir. You've done a bunch of stuff. We love having you on. Sorry it took this long to get you back in here. I know your wrath is deserved for us. To the other way around, but you know what I mean. So, guys, this is going to be a very packed show. Later on, me and Jay will talk about a ridiculously late Yankees postmortem and a ridiculously ridiculous next season that's coming up. But first, let's do our mid-year review in the NFL. All right, the locals, if you knew exactly what they would do in 2022, you don't know the NFL this year, my friend. The Giants are on a bye this week, already with more wins than they had all of last season. The G-Men are 6-2. Home games against the Houston Texans and Detroit Lions at home coming up over the next 2 weeks. Then after a Turkey Day matchup with Dallas, as of yesterday, the Commanders lost today. There were no under 500 teams left on the schedule. Now they have 2 against the Commanders and the Colts as well. Still a harder schedule than it definitely was in the first half, but very hard to do in the NFL when you don't play a mediocre team week after week and actually get some good teams to end the year. And as I mentioned once on the show, their schedule is backloaded. So we're going to celebrate. And then we're going to do some cold hard realization that this year isn't even half over for the Giants. They still have 9 weeks to go. So we're going to ask some questions to Joe. Joe's going to answer them, and Jay's going to talk a lot more, and I'm going to try to stay in the corner and let everybody do their magic. Jay, go ahead.
All right, Joe, I've been, the first thing we're going to talk about, obviously, is the offense. And I've been saying all season that Brian Dable and Mike Kafka have done a pretty creative job of putting this unit in the best positions possible. They've had pass protection issues, lack of wide receivers making plays, injuries. Don't know who's going to be available each week. And beyond Saquon Barkley, who's second in the NFL in rushing yards and third in yards per game, and quarterback Daniel Jones has been efficient as a quarterback. Some true dual threat action going with the plays he's made with his legs. Other than those 2 guys, we don't know who they're going to have each week. So I got to tell you, rookie tight end Daniel Bellinger's been a nice surprise. Darius Slayton seems to have reclaimed his mojo a little bit. Offensive game plans have played to the player's strength, and the in-game adjustments have been pretty solid. That said, they've been walking a fine line every game, and it finally bit them in the ass in the loss to the Seahawks, though punt return adventures played a big part in that. So all that being said, what has stood out the most for you, good or bad, with this offense so far in the first half of the season?
Well, I think you said it right, Jay. Daniel Bellinger's been the pleasant surprise. And those of us who followed him in college, he played out here at San Diego State. A lot of my guys that I referee with go to the games in San Diego on whenever they're home. So we've known about him a little bit. The idea was he was a natural blocking tight end, so that would help the running game. But he's obviously been very good with his hands, with his routes. And I think that's what hurt them last week, was missing him. I think he was the big loss of the week. And it was funny, we were sitting around and somebody said, what do you think is going to happen this week? And I said, I think this is the week they get caught, because you're missing 2 offensive linemen. You're missing Bellinger. You're missing a couple of guys on defense. You're missing Ojulari. And it just got to be too much. And I thought the bye came 1 week too late for him, basically. Having to go across country, play in that nightmare of a stadium against a guy who wanted to beat them fairly badly in Geno Smith. But I think the pleasant surprise, obviously, is Saquon's healthy. Nice to see. The pleasant surprise has also been, Daniel Jones has been running with the ball a lot and hasn't even almost lost a fumble. Last year in the first game against Denver, he fell down and lost a fumble, and without anybody touching him. And so obviously all that ball security stuff seems to be mitigated for whatever reason. I don't know if his hands grew or if he figured something else, because it's not like he's holding it, tiki style. It's still out there, but he doesn't seem to drop it anymore. So I think as far as the offense goes, Thomas has been fantastic as a left tackle.
Yep.
He's been able to favor the other side so they could double team on that side, help out Neal, who had one really rough game, but since then been okay. The middle guys are good. Gates is coming back, getting healthy. So I think all of that stuff was positive. Darius Slayton, I don't know what happened to his hands. It's like he's using somebody else's hands at times. Just doesn't seem to match up sometimes. Richie James was a nice surprise in the beginning, but you know how those guys go. He'll have, I don't think he's
There's a reason those guys are that far down on the depth chart as they are.
Yeah, exactly. So how many games can that go? He's still like a surprise every time he catches a ball. And of course, the 2 muff punts are going to come back to haunt him.
Yep.
So I think as far as just sticking with the offense for now, I think the biggest surprise has been the play of Daniel Jones for me, that they've used him correctly.
Right.
He's been very good at running the correct offense. And just to see him, and I was saying to somebody today, I was talking to Chris Delgado today, and I said, what I would do right now in this off week is I'd offer him 6 years, $120 million. Get him cheap, get him before he thinks he's going to get an agent to go free agent and to get somebody to bid on him and stuff. I think he'd be thrilled with getting $120 million and make part of it incentives and guarantees and opt-out years and all the stuff that they can do to protect themselves. But do it now and see what he has to say, because I know they want to get Julian Love locked up. I know they want to get him locked up if they continue to have success. I think they all like him. He's as Dave said this week, they said, "What do you think about Daniel Jones?" He goes, "Well, we're off today, and I walked down the hall to go see him because I know he's here.
Yep.
I know it's 7:30 in the morning, so he's here." And I think that's what you want. I think you want that leader on your team for a while. So
exactly.
That's where I stand on it.
Rabbi, defense?
I completely agree with all those things. I do have to say though, I would like to see a more aggressive plan as you see them in the beginning of the game in the offense. I do feel like that they save a lot of stuff in the second half, which we talked about. I'd
like to see a little more.
But that's for another time. Yes. Defensively, Joe, the change to Wink Martindale has helped rebrand this team's identity. Defensively, they're still not amazingly great against the run, 27th going into last week. They are middle of the road against the pass, but they are one of the best scoring defenses in the league. I believe 7th going into this week's game. They don't give up points in the red zone, which is they don't give up touchdowns in the red zone. They give up field goals in the red zone, and that was a key to their early wins, especially against Carolina and Chicago. And there's a lot of stars on this team, Joe, and a lot of hope for the future. So good or bad, what is your surprise defensively so far?
Well, obviously it's got to be the cornerbacks that have filled in on the other side. I mean, those guys have been.
It's like a Nash. It's like a rotation. It's like the first ever cornerback rotation I think that we've ever seen, where there's no star whatsoever.
No, but they've been great, and it's like every week it's a different guy making a play. Adoree Jackson is just as solid as he's always been, but everybody else is just making plays and really shutting down guys. And every week, like you say, it's not that they're just going against Flott or they're going against whoever. They just seem to make plays at the right times, and they take a little bit of chances. But McKinney's been really solid, Love's been really solid. So I think that's got to be the biggest surprise, is that the pass defense. And these announcers, as bad as they are, and we talk about this all the time, they talk about, Wink Martindale, he blitzes all the time, but he doesn't. He blitzes at the right time. He blitzes from different spots. He puts himself in a good thing, and then he uses it as a surprise. It's sort of like we're lined up like this, and then we don't come. We're lined up, we don't come, we line up, and then when they get to the red zone, bam, here comes everybody. And they do it in a smart way. He doesn't leave his guys just sitting out there on an island all by themselves. He really does it in a nice way where they rotate guys in and they know how to favor one side of the field and get some things. And they've been without, look, Ojulari's barely played. Thibodeau's learning on the job. He's getting better every week. He wasn't even in shape for the first 2 or 3 weeks that he came back. You could see he wasn't able to do what he normally could do. Yeah, Leonard Williams was out for a couple of weeks. So every position on that team's been a revolving door, and they've played great. And like you said, They just don't give up touchdowns. And think of who they shut down. You know, the first week it was stop Derrick Henry and let Tannehill beat you. Well, they stopped Derrick Henry except for one long run. They went to Carolina. They stopped McCaffrey except for one long run. They won that game the same way. We all knew that Wink Martindale going back to Baltimore, he knows what he can do to Jackson. He knows what his weaknesses are. They knew how to attack him, keep him from running too much. They knew how to rush the passer the proper way. And again, they seem to learn each week. And, you know, Joe Judge used to always say, you know, the game plan's different every week, but these guys really it is. And they really do seem to concentrate and change up. And he'll have different guys. One week they had less linemen active because against certain teams like Aaron Rodgers, you needed more defensive backs. Other times they take defensive backs and not have them active to have more guys up front and more linebackers because they're going to stop the run like they did in Tennessee. So they really do change, and they change personnel. And again, whoever practices well is the guy who's playing. So I think that the only surprise on defense is that those guys have held up. And like you said, it's every week you look at the transactions. This guy off the practice squad, this guy off the street, this guy from here. You have no idea. I'm watching games and I have no idea who half these guys are, but it's worked. And again, it's his game plan, and they buy into it. And obviously winning, you know, 6 out of your 7 games helps you buy into a plan that it works. And as we talked about before we got on the air, there's been some strange happenings in some of their games that always went the other way. You know, we lost the first game to a 62-yard field goal last year. This year we win the first game on a missed 32-yard field goal. You know, it's like all of a sudden things change. And that game was big. You know, that Tennessee game, going for 2 and putting it on your defense, and your defense not really holding up, that they let him get all the way down to the 20-yard line, and then the guy misses the 35-yard field goal. You're like, okay, that didn't quite work out, but it worked out. And that made them believe more of, hey, here we are, we're going to be aggressive, and this is how we're going to play. So I think it's been, you know, all positive as far as coaching staff and how the games have gone.
Very quickly, speaking of apparently coaches named Brian love going for 2 late in games for the win, just like LSU did last night. What do you make of Dayball's first 8 games right now with the Giants going 6-2 and building a culture?
I think it's the difference between the other guys who you hired as coordinators that wanted to stay coordinators. I think the biggest thing, and we talked about this in the preseason, he's a head coach. He's letting Kafka call the plays. Again, he says, hey, we all have input. We all talk. Because I'm not talking while he's calling the play. He said, but in between series, what do we see? What do we want to run? What do we want to try to establish? That he gives the direction. And then those guys are able to use what they have and communicate with each other and make the plays work. So, and then leaving Wink to kind of do his own thing. But you can see him talking to Martindale, say, this is what we're going to do on offense. We're going for 2. So it's going to be on your guys. We're doing this. So I think him being a true head coach has allowed these guys to flourish a little bit and has really, again, built the culture around the building. He thanks his analytics people. He thanks the people who keep the clock for him. He thanks the guys who do the replays. So I think he's really built a team there that's very good. And him and Shane being on the same page all the time with things. And the way that they even communicate with the press. They never talk for each other. They always say, that's a better question for Joe. That's a better question for Brian. Talk to the players. I don't speak for the players. I think he's really done a wonderful job as a first-year head coach, being a head coach. And not, I'm an offensive coordinator, I have to call the plays. I think that was big that he was able to get a Kapka and be able to let him go ahead and run the game for him.
All right. So, Joe, I don't think any of us saw the Giants going into their bye with a 6-2 record. Didn't do much at the trade deadline other than getting rid of Kadarius Toney, who wasn't likely to be on the team next season. Rabbi mentioned the second half schedule, and it does have some winnable games. So 9-10 wins is possible, but some changes need to be made on both sides of the ball. So with that in mind, what are you going to be watching for in the second half from the Giants?
Well, I think, again, hopefully they get some guys back healthy. I think that's the biggest issue that they have. And before you came on, Jay, Rabbi and I were going through this, and I said, look, if you expect 10 wins, which is a lofty goal for this team starting out the year, you're going to lose 6 games. So, be prepared to go, 4-6 or whatever it is in the remaining games, or 4-5 in the remaining games. You're going to lose a lot of games. You're probably going to play 500 ball. And as I said to Rabbi, you may lose 5 division games this year out of 6 games, or you may lose 4 division games, I think, so it's going to be a very strange year. I think they can get to 9-10. I think we all count Houston, Detroit, Indianapolis as 3 wins, and Washington at least once. That gets you to 10. Now, again, can you be satisfied with 10? The way everybody else is playing? Yeah, 10 wins is going to look pretty good this year, because I don't know who else. The Rams, we all thought the West was the class of the NFC. They all stank. There's just not very good teams in there. And, Tampa Bay stole the win today, but so we'll see where that takes them. And Atlanta, as we thought, was no good. New Orleans isn't very good. So I don't know where this is all going to end up, but I just hope that they get healthy. I hope they continue to grow in what they do. I hope, I think the changes you're going to see is being a little bit more aggressive if they can on offense. But if you saw, Jay, you saw the beginning of the game 2 weeks ago where they came out and threw it on the first 5 plays. And that was that was a complete thing of looking over at Jacksonville, who's great against the run. They're number 1 against the run. So they said, okay, we're going to stop Saquon. We're going to let Daniel Jones beat us. And he threw 3 straight passes, and then he wound up hitting Slayton. And so I think, again, they've taught him to be Eli-like in the fact that you're not the hero. We're not looking for you to win the game. You walk up to the line, you see 8 guys in the box, throw the ball. You see 5 guys in the box, and you see deep safeties, run the ball. You got Saquon, for God's sake. And, how many times did Dayball in the first 6 weeks go, glad he's on our team.
Yep.
glad we got 26.
Yep.
So, I think again, and this was going back to stuff about the entire league, but I think as long as they continue to grow with him, do what he does well, do what Daniel does well, and try to, they got another wide receiver off the street from Buffalo last week, and try to find somebody who's a little bit dependable that he can go to. Hopefully Bellinger comes back. That'll be big. Again, the offensive line seems to grow every week and get a little bit better. Gates should help when that comes back. Maybe a Lemieux comes back, towards the end of the season. Just strengthen that up and hopefully stay healthy and get healthy.
Yeah. So we're going to switch.
Let's move over to the Jets. Let's move over to the Jets real quickly. I'll do the hosting of this show. All right, on to the Jets taking receipts in September 2022. Oh man, that actually might mean something now. After a 1-2 start, that was followed by 4 wins in a row, including wins at Green Bay and Denver. Not sure anybody would have expected that to start the season. And then after the agony of a 13th straight loss to the Patriots last week, they followed it with pure ecstasy. Why do I have to rewrite the script all the time? After they won against the Buffalo Bills today, 22-17. I was saying it's a hard schedule. I can't search for a win. And they're 6-3. That's pretty good. Bye is next week, so they're going to have a lot of time to celebrate this victory. They get their second chance at the Patriots in 2 weeks on the 20th, and then on my birthday, the 27th, they host Chicago. 2 very important games coming up, and then another tough stretch drive. So same questions. Jay, let's talk about the offense real quick.
All right. So the Jets offense has been solid when quarterback Zach Wilson has played under control and not forced to throw because he wants to make a play and hates having to throw the ball away. Lost to the Patriots, very much on his shoulders. But today he took what was there, 18-25, 154 yards, 1 score, 0 picks, 101 passer rating, did not really make any wilder errant throws. Jets offense has not been pretty, but it's done the job, made the plays when it's needed to when called on to do so. Michael Carter and James Robinson was picked up from Jacksonville at the trade deadline after Breece Hall got hurt. Have done a good job with the running game today. Rookie wide receiver Garrett Wilson had another solid game, 8 catches, 92 yards. Joe, what stood out the most for you, good or bad, with this offense so far in the first half of the season?
Well, first of all, they should call the Giants and thank them because Travis Etienne having a big game allowed them to go out and trade for the guy from Jacksonville. And that was huge because exactly what you and I predicted in the beginning of the year was they had one really good running back and he was going to get hurt, and he did. So we all knew that was going to happen sometime. We didn't know when it was going to happen. They really had some good timing for a change. The guy gets hurt. Jacksonville says, oh, we have a real running back. We don't need the other guy. Let's trade him to the Jets. And then I think, like you just said about Zach playing under control for a change today, you know, he was awful last week as far as throwing balls around. When you try to throw the ball away, throw it out of bounds, right, Jay? You don't throw it inbounds.
Nope.
So, and I thought it was very telling if you go back and look, the last drive where they came from their 4-yard line and marched down the field, they threw the ball one time. And that was at the end of the drive. They threw the ball how many times? Once. They went 96 yards and threw the ball once. And that's the key to this offense. Take it out of his hands. He threw the ball 25 times. He completed 18 passes. Not great, not wonderful, nothing big, but he didn't run around, throw it against the grain off his back foot while he's being hit. Instead of throwing it away, throw it inbounds, all the stuff that he did last week. Hopefully he learned something and it wasn't just an accident. But it shows a lot that this offensive coordinator and the head coach said, hey, we need to go 96 yards to win this game. Let's not put it in his hands. Let's put it in everybody else's hands. And let's go down the field the way we know we can.
Yep.
And that's exactly what they did. So I think they got really fortunate that they were able to make that trade. And to be able to now let him, Rabbi, again, we're talking about this, let him run the game the way it has to be. They were looking for them to pass from their own 4-yard line because they figured they needed to go down the field, and they didn't. And he read the defenses, hopefully, and that was it. And whether they forced it on him or not, that's how this team has to play.
Yep.
The only thing that stopped the Jets' drive today and for Zach Wilson from throwing was a arid sky cab falling down from the sky and letting that game get delayed.
Oh man.
All right, Joe. The defense has been gaining momentum, and today probably at least their opus for this year. Got 4 consistently on Josh Allen. Made Josh Allen seem like not a rookie, but a guy who definitely looked a lot like that guy who was involved in that 9-6 game in Jacksonville last year, which I knew would come up once in a while, rather than the person who has been an MVP all year. And there's so many surprises on a lot of the areas. Obviously, Sauce Gardner is definitely one of them in his amazing rookie season. So what have you seen, good or bad, on the defensive side of the ball? Has to be good the way that they've been playing.
Yeah, no, they played well. I mean, the line has been tremendous for them. And you know, we thought it might be a problem that not having linebackers, but these guys up front have really played well. And they've stopped the run consistently. They've put guys, again, you put it in the quarterback's hands, try to get some losses on first down, try to get some negative plays. And then they're very good at rushing the quarterback. And the back end is held up enough. I mean, the kid has played very, very well. He got burned once today, but he seems to learn, and they have enough guys out there that can cover the other side as long as they figure out what's going on. But again, that pressure up the middle, that pressure up from those 4 guys, and the fact that they can stop running games pretty much cold just adds to their success. And they played very, very well. They deserve a lot of credit. The only thing they did that was extremely Jet-like was making such a big deal about the New England game. We're going to wear black helmets. We want everybody out there an hour early. We invited Joe Beningo to come do this. You got this guy back. We got this. And then you lose the frigging game. Just play the game. Well, everything doesn't have to be the Super Bowl. You know,
Nope.
I think the part of the Jets that have been successful the last 20 years has been the marketing department. Those guys deserve a raise. They all deserve whatever the NFL can give them as an award. They're fantastic, but it's never true. It never translates. And you feel bad for Salah in a way that they made such a big deal about that. Belichick's never going to lose to them. He's just never going to lose. Just accept it. Since you told him he wasn't going to be head coach, he's never going to lose to you. It's just not going to happen.
Nope.
So again, you made a big deal about the wrong game. Now you come back, everybody's humbled, and what do? You beat the Buffalo Bills. So just shut your mouth, play football, play tough football like you've been doing. Keep Zach Wilson under wraps. Don't try to make him out to be Namath yet, and you'll be fine. And you'll continue to win some games. Again, their schedule is kind of up and down, which I think helps in a way. It's not a big stretch of poor teams. And again, I think it's always funny this year, Rabbi, what you said. They've beaten the Packers and they've beaten the Broncos. Well, I'm not sure it means anything.
Doesn't mean it now, but
in the history of the
it
NFL, when you
before
hear
the season.
No, but that's what I'm saying. Is like even with the Steelers, as Jay knows now, it's like, oh, you're playing Pittsburgh, and everybody goes, yeah, all right. It's not the same thing. It's not like playing. We talked about the big Fox game next week being the Cowboys and the Packers, and you're like, it might be the worst game of the week, but we don't know yet. But again, those franchise names really don't carry any weight this year at all, and it's just a different season.
All right, so descendants of the Shanahan tree have been doing very well this year. Kyle Shanahan is 4-4 and looking like he's on his way up. Mike McDaniel is 6-3 and looking like he's on his way up with a real offense. And Robert Saleh is finally actually doing some defensive work and is now the head of a 6-3 Jets team. What do you think of his second year at the helm?
Yeah, no, he's again. I think it's been tough. I thought the decision, in the beginning of the year, he made some mistakes. And the whole thing with Zach Wilson and, not saying, oh, he's fine, but he's not going to play, or he's not fine, but he's going to play. All that stuff kind of looked shaky in the beginning, but I think they've finally gotten it under control. They figured out how they have to play. Again, don't get caught up in the marketing machine. Just do what you got to do. Understand what Zach Wilson is. He's not, nobody is Patrick Mahomes. Don't think that way. Don't think just because he came out of BYU throwing the ball all over the place, that's going to translate, because it doesn't. As we all know, we've talked about this ad nauseum, that college kids can't just recreate what they did in college. It doesn't work. It doesn't happen. So figure it out. Figure out what he is. Figure out what his strengths are. Take some time to teach him to throw the ball away. But again, now you have some time. And now you have a running game. And you got an offensive line suddenly that plays well without, again, the big name guy that came in at 300 that we all worried about all offseason. Turns out you didn't need him. Turns out you got plenty of guys that can play. So, and you got some good wide receivers, and if this guy wants to leave, let him leave at this point. You're kind of at that point with this team where you're like, you want all the distractions out of the way. Just play football, play to your strengths, do what you do best. You don't have to make Zach Wilson the superstar. Just play and figure out your offense and defense from there. I think he's actually grown more in the first 6 or 7 weeks than he did before that, just from last year. So I think they're in a good spot. And, as soon as you and I say that, we know it's going to happen. They'll lose 7 in a row or something.
There you go. And Joe, I think we're surprised, especially after today's events, the Jets are 6-3 and in contention in the AFC East. I think getting some guys healthy will help, but how they get through the gauntlet that awaits them without running back Breece Hall and their best offensive lineman, Elijah Vera Tucker, both of whom are out for the season, will be telling. The rest of that schedule, Jets have their bye this week. Not easy. 5 of the 8 are on the road trips to Foxborough, Minnesota, Buffalo, Seattle, and Miami. The 3 home games are winnable. The Bears, the Lions, and the Jags. What are you watching for? Huh?
Oh, my.
Oh, my. Touche. Well played, Rabbi. Joe, what are you watching for the Jets in the second half of the season?
Well, again, I would hope that they would continue to grow the proper way and not try to force too many things. Again, going to Buffalo at this point now, after beating them, going to Buffalo is going to be brutal. Again, going to Foxborough is going to be tough. Going to Miami, who put up 38 today or whatever it was, ridiculous amount of points. So I think because of those games on the road and some of those opponents who are very strong opponents, they're not name opponents. They're real opponents. These guys are good. And I think that's going to be tough. And like I said, beating Buffalo today was great because he ain't beating them the next time. And it's one of those things where you're going to have to be careful. Miami's always a tough out for them, right? There's a lot of games in there that traditionally they don't play well in, and those teams are playing well this year. So I think they have to be careful with that. And again, with this 17-game schedule, Jay, you feel good at 6 and what is it? They're 6-3.
6-3.
Right? Yeah, you feel really good at 6-3, but you're going, all right. So again, if we get 3 more wins, we got 9, and everybody would be excited. But how many losses does that give you? Coming up. So I think it's one of those things where you have to really be realistic, for both teams. You got to be realistic to just look at that goal that you wanted to get to. in the beginning. That 9 or 10 wins when we all met for that before the opening weekend, everybody thought we were nuts if they won 9 or 10 games. So now you got to sit there and say, okay, I'm still happy with 9 wins, but that's going to come with 5 losses and 5 more losses than what we have now. So I think that's going to be the key to how do they handle losing those 5 or 6 more games.
Yep.
Without thinking it's a bad thing. So
yep.
I think they will handle. Joe, could you stay with us for any more, or?
I kind of got to go.
Okay. All right, man. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We can let you get off of here. Thank you so much, man. And we will continue talking to you during the season about the local teams and everything else.
Good to see you, my friend.
Good, guys. Thank you, guys. Take care now.
Take care, Joe. All right. That is Mr. Joe Tufaro. He is an extraordinaire. He is a writer. He is now owning clubs, and he is doing a lot of stuff, and he has a lot of rep experience. But we'll be talking to him a lot more during the season. All right. Let's talk quickly about the rest of the NFL. And again, Jay, if you think you know this season so far,
you don't.
You're dead wrong. So we have perennial losers like the Dolphins and Jets making waves in the AFC, and the NFC division leaders, as at least going in today, were the following: Jalen Hurts, Kirk Cousins, Marcus Mariota, and we'll talk about a fourth guy in just a second. I want to talk quickly about some of the things we were going to talk to Joe about, but I don't want to bring it up to both of us since we're doing it. Let's first talk about the second and third names on that list. You know who I didn't mention? Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady. They were the 1 and 2 seeds last year in the NFL. Brady got one big drive at the end of the game today to keep his team probably.
How does he keep doing that?
He does it because of the fact that it was the fucking Rams there.
It's because he's Tom Brady. It's that simple. Tom Brady,
but he's now 4-5, and Aaron Rodgers is now 3-6 with a 4.5 game deficit in the division to the Minnesota Vikings. So, for two guys who lost their wife or fiance in the past year, is it time for the two to divorce the NFL? Very good question. And Jay, I want to know your answer to that.
Look, honestly, I don't think so. I mean, are they going to, resurrect their team's respective seasons this year? I don't think Rodgers has enough. I think Rodgers personally still has enough left in the tank. I don't think he has enough around him in order for the Packers to recover. I think Minnesota came into this season better on paper, and it's kind of resonated on the field. The Packers were given, the preseason division title because it's Aaron Rodgers and they're the Packers. But I said to you, I thought they would be hard pressed to repeat that. They lost arguably the best wide receiver in the NFL. In Devontae Adams. They lost their number 2 receiver in Vontez Scanling, who's putting up really good numbers in Kansas City with Patrick Mahomes. And the running game is meh. The offensive line is meh. The defense hasn't really stepped up. And I don't think there's enough there that even Rodgers and, Tony Romo made the comment in the Rams Bucks game today that, elite quarterbacks raise the play of those around them. And to a certain extent, that is true. But there is a point where, if the guys that you're trying to raise are second and third tier guys and have been their entire campaign, just because you're playing with Aaron Rodgers doesn't necessarily mean you're suddenly going to become tier 2 and tier 1 guys. It doesn't really happen that way. I'm looking forward to some more Aaron Rodgers soap opera drama in the offseason. That'll give us something to laugh about while the NFL is, on its break, in between seasons. As for the Bucks, look, as good as Atlanta looked today, and the Marcus Mariota I saw running the Falcons offense today reminded me a lot of the guy who was shredding my USC defense in his days at Oregon to a certain extent. I still think this division is wide open. Anytime you give Tom Brady enough time in good field position. I don't care how many timeouts he has or doesn't have. He's Tom frickin' Brady. He's going to find a way. And if today, he found a way today in a game that the Rams should have won if they could mount any kind of rushing attack, which they could not.
Which they had for most of the game, which was
right.
very
But,
shocking,
the play calling in that last drive where they needed 1 first down, Cooper Kupp should not have slid. He should have taken the first down, even if the many went got out of bounds. Yeah. They needed the extra set of plays. But you gave Brady the time, and he showed you that even at 45, and even if his personal life is a mess, he can still do this. So that division is still tightly bunched. So I do think that Brady, if he's rounding into form, can actually take the Bucs to that division.
So I think you have two different situations here. I think with Aaron Rodgers, you have a guy, yes, I understand completely. It is a much different set of wide receivers. I understand completely. Devontae Adams is having great numbers, but also having a terrible year in Las Vegas. I really think maybe it's time for the two to at least get back together to see what the talents are for both of those guys. But honestly, I think Aaron Rodgers is just not willing to adapt to plays. I don't think Aaron Rodgers is willing to work with his wide receivers. It just seems like almost all of the times he's on the Pat McAfee show, throwing them under the bus rather than encouraging them, yelling at them rather than encouraging them. This is the sign of a leader, a guy who took this much money to get himself back and trying to make a run. And he really isn't doing any of that, in my opinion. No. And he's not going to be a guy who's washed up. But I think seeing him doing what he's doing this year makes me think, even though the contract is ridiculous, because people are willing to chase somebody who has those skills or looking for a Tom Brady-like situation when he was with Tampa Bay to get them to a Super Bowl, it kind of makes me think Aaron Rodgers might not belong to the Packers too much longer the way this is going. It's almost like the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again. And if there's anybody that knows insane, it's Aaron Rodgers. He needs to change what he does with his wide receivers or get out of Green Bay. That's simple as that. Okay. For Tom Brady, it's a little different because I do think personal stuff has taken effect. And the guy is 45 and he has done pretty much everything that you can do for a quarterback in NFL history. You come back because you love to play the game, but if you're going to Bob Kraft's wedding on a Friday night, you can't necessarily think you're going to play the offense on a Sunday and understand everything. You can't pick it up. And this year, talent is not the only thing that's going to win in the NFL. It's learning your team's scheme. Him and Bowles just don't fit. Brady knows how to make the plays, but every now and then, they had 6 drops today. The Bucs still have one of the most star-studded, accomplished wide receiver corps, even with injuries. And they had 6 drops today. That team does not look whole. And of course, it took a tight end that nobody knew, who is as white bread as the day that was born, to make sure that they won that game today, because that's how Tom Brady does it, apparently. Just find the nearest guy and have them do it. It was a great final drive. Yes, Brady is 45, and sometimes you don't realize how he's doing this. But for the love of God, I do think I'm curious to see. Yes, this could be a 9-8 division winner very easily, and you don't want to be that 5th seed, which could very well be that NFC East loser that has to go to Tampa Bay for a wild card weekend matchup, and that would be a little bit tough for them. But Tom Brady still has a lot of work to do, but today was at least the first step, getting himself back to 4-5. Okay, let's talk about 2 other things in the NFL. It's been very interesting. We'll take each of these separately. I might make a smart ass comment here or there, but Jay, yeah, I do that from time to time. Jay, that fourth division leading quarterback in the NFC West, where you have a Super Bowl runner-up, a Super Bowl winner, and one of the highest paid quarterbacks in the league, is that 4th guy. Yeah. Seahawks quarterback Geno Smith. A long way from being that bastard that broke Eli Manning's start streak, or that bastard that got his jaw broke in a Jets training camp in 2013. Explain the fact that he is leading the division by a game and a half, and he is 6-3 as the starting quarterback this year.
Yeah, you remember me saying that there was no way in hell
Yeah,
Carroll
eat
was
that
going to go into
humble
this
pie. And
season
I've
with
already
Drew
told
Lock
Anthony
and
to eat
Geno
that
Smith as
humble
his
pie.
quarterbacks.
I've already told Anthony, who was the one that said we were overreacting when Geno got buried in week 2, and he said to me and texted to me, "There's still time. Time is running out because Geno plays this offense perfectly, Jay."
And I've had to eat some crow on this, and deservedly so, but come on. None of us here in New York, based on our experience with the Geno Smith experience, could have seen this coming. Maybe Pete Carroll saw it coming, but I don't think any of us did. Geno Smith as first half MVP? No way. Yeah, it's an actual legit conversation, partner. He was offensive player of the week in week 4. He went 23 of 30, 320 yards. 2 scores and 132.6 passer rating, 7 carries for 49 yards, and another score, leading Seattle to a 48-45 win over Detroit. He was named NFC Offensive Player of the Month for October. He went 102 for 147. That's 69.4% completion percentage. 1,207 yards, 9 scores, a 111.7 passer rating in 5 games, leading the Seahawks to a 4-1 record. He had the highest passer rating of any NFC quarterback during that month. Smith also had 143 rushing yards and a rushing score in October. His 10 total touchdowns led all NFC quarterbacks from weeks 4 to 8, and he leads the NFL in completion percentage, 72.7. That was before today's game, through the first 8 weeks of the season. Smith has gone from being a quarterback who came into the season with questions about whether or not he could play at a high level. He was the lowest ranked quarterback in the Athletics annual quarterback tiers ranking piece by Mike Sando, in which he surveys coaches and execs around the league. NFL insiders polled by Sando didn't view Smith as a legitimate starter. From that, he's gone to a quarterback who now has questions of whether or not he can keep his play at this level, which, make no mistake, is at MVP level right now for the 5-3, now 6-3 leaders of the NFC West. Carroll is not surprised by Smith's play. After he said this after the Seahawks win over the Giants in week 8. Here's the quote. There's no mystery like he's going to run out of gas or something. It's not like that. He knows exactly what he's doing, and he shows you week in and week out, throw after throw after throw. And he's been executing what Carroll considers the fundamental role of an NFL quarterback, throw a catchable ball. He and Matt Stafford are the only quarterbacks above 70% completion percentage, and Smith leads all quarterbacks in completion percentage above expectation. That measures the difference between a quarterback's actual completion percentage and the rate at which he'd be expected to complete those throws based on the difficulty level of the throw. And only 6.8% of Smith's throws have been off target, which is 5th best in the league, according to True Media Stats. Smith has also shown a top-flight quarterback's ability to make pre-snap reads at the line of scrimmage and audible the Seahawks into better plays. 3 of Seattle's touchdowns in that win over the Lions came out of Smith coming to the line, seeing what was in front of him, and checking into a different play than what was originally called in the huddle. One last display has been key to Seahawks' success. According to RBSDM.com, an analytics site created by the Athletics' Ben Baldwin, the Seahawks passed the ball on early downs in neutral situations at the 5th highest rate in the league, a little under 61%. Yes, as Carroll wanted, Seattle is a top 10 rushing team by EPA per play. But from a game script standpoint, the Seahawks have relied more on their passing game, which is a little surprising in the post-Russ era. And that starts with Smith, who is operating this offense with great efficiency and showing no indication that his level of play will be dropping off anytime soon. He keeps this up. He was 26 of 34 today, 275 yards, 8.1 per attempt, 2 touchdowns, 1 pick, and 106.9 passer rating in the win over Arizona. He keeps that up. NFL Comeback Player of the Year is a lock, Rabbi.
I think it's already there, honestly. I think that you can go over. This is one of the biggest stories I've seen. But it does show a lot of what – there's 2 things here. It does show that a lot of systems have been working in the NFL this year, not necessarily stars, although there's some people who overshadow that, like Patrick Mahomes, because he's freaking Patrick Mahomes. Right. And even with notwithstanding today, Josh Allen. But it does make me think, Super Bowl winner or not, there's a lot to what happened with Russ the final years in Seattle. If you read reports, especially ones that came out before that first game, and it almost seems like every single week there's a veiled pot shot from whether it be Tyler Lockett at Russell Wilson or something like that. I don't think Russ was willing to, might have been even less of a team player than we think. And a lot of actions without a doubt, but a lot of actions this year has really proven it that way.
I mean, we've talked about it. We've seen what's happened, since he's gone over to Denver. Everybody's talking about how, who he was and, how important he was. And he was the reason, the engine that made Seattle go. I think you're seeing that Carroll knew what he was talking about when he said, we need to let Russ cook a little bit less, and to a certain extent, a lot less, because you're seeing it now in Denver. Russ is basically being allowed to do what he wants, and it's glaringly obvious he's not who he used to be. Not by any stretch of the imagination. He is not a Super Bowl quarterback anymore. Not this year anyway, and probably not the last year he was in Seattle, and who knows, maybe even the year before that.
Injuries have hurt him a lot. Very quickly, I think the biggest disappointment this year, I want to give a shout out to the other two teams in the AFC West. The Denver Broncos barely got themselves a game-saving win against Jacksonville this past couple of weeks ago in London to get them 3-5. Very stagnant offense. Obviously, the loss of Jermaine Williams, the running back, pretty much put that team in just a little bit of ice. Wide receivers, again, a very talented bunch, hasn't done anything. Rumors were abound of Jerry Jeudy being traded. That might have been the best thing for them. Never happened. But they got some traction back in that Jacksonville game, and I do think Denver has a run left in them. Where it takes them, I don't know, but we'll see what happens at the beginning of the season. The Chargers, yes, they're 5-3, and they have been missing Mike Williams and Keenan Allen missing Keenan Allen pretty much the entire year. Mike Williams just recently. I think there's a big problem. I think Justin Herbert is just not the same quarterback this year, whether it be because of talent that he doesn't have outside of running back Austin Eckler, who's scored 9 touchdowns in 5 weeks, or just the fact that he's injured. I think he got that huge hit to the ribs in week 2 against Kansas City, and it's just never, ever been the same. And I think he's just been playing for, yes, they're 5-3, the Chargers, but I think if you thought that team was the Super Bowl team when the season began, they are farther from it now. We'll see what happens. They still can provide some sparks, but they're not the same team that we thought they were going to be, which leaves us to the biggest disappointment. And I know you love to make fun of them, Jay. I'll do it this week. The Las Vegas Raiders. Oh my God, this has been unmitigated disaster. And there just seemed to be no signs of it. There's not a lot of turmoil in the team. There were no controversies going into the season. I mean, for God's sake, last year they had the controversy of controversies in the NFL and John Gruden, and they managed to get a playoff spot out of that. This is the start you would have expected for having a racist head coach last year. But surprise, surprise, 2-6. And they're just not doing it. They blew a 17-point loss today against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Devontae Adams went for 155 and 2 touchdowns. A lot of that damage done in the first half when they built that 17-0 lead. And the defense just gave it up. The Jacksonville Jaguars pretty much played like the team that we saw in the first 2 or 3 games of the year, and not the team that we had seen since then. The defense is just piss poor. They have no secondary whatsoever, and even though Max Crosby can get to the quarterback, they just haven't used the defense in the right way. They gave up the big lead to Arizona in week 2 of the regular season. The team has just never been the same since. And I also have to give credit. I also have to mention, even though Adams has been a scoring machine this year, top 5 consistent fantasy numbers, been a guy who always moves the chains. Even though this is probably the best year for their running back, Josh Jacobs, who went on a nice little tear with multiple touchdown games in the last 2 games. There's just nothing else beside it. Darren Waller is a shell of himself. Injuries have pretty much made him invisible in the field, didn't even play today. Hunter Renfrow was pretty much the possession receiver for this team last year. He's been pretty much invisible. Derek Carr, talented quarterback as well, may just not be the fit, unfortunately, for Las Vegas. And everybody was like, hey, Carr and Adams are going to get back together. Everything is going to be hunky-dory. This is going to be a great success story. It just hasn't worked out. I think the Raiders overachieved a ton last year. Division was supposed to be tough. It's not as tough as it was, but Las Vegas just has no win in them. And I also have to put a lot of blame in Josh McDaniels' face. We talked about it a lot with Brian Daboll. There are coaches that are meant to be coaches who can go from coordinators to being coaches, but that's only a select few. There's a lot of coordinators that are just coordinators. And there's a reason why there was a gap of basically 10 years between the last Josh McDaniels job and this Josh McDaniels job. I don't think he's long for the Raiders at all. I think the Raiders need a culture change, Jay.
Yeah, I think so too. And here's the thing. And, I brought this up previously. Davante Adams had a big game today. And Davante Adams, is Davante Adams. He's going to perform and he's going to put numbers up no matter what. I don't think Carr is having a bad season. I think the problem here is that Carr is thinking too much instead of just making plays. And the problem, and the reason being, is that Josh McDaniels' offense is complicated. It's complex. It's got a lot of levels. It's got a lot of moving parts. And there's a lot of verbiage that has to be, that a quarterback has to learn and understand. And look, and every quarterback, other than Tom Brady, and we'd have to go all the way back to know if Tom Brady's is an exception. This is an offense that a quarterback will take a while to get comfortable with because it's not going to be anything like he's ever been in before. Now, is some of that on Josh McDaniels because he refuses to alter, his scheme and maybe make things a little easier or, make things a little less complicated for his quarterback. So his quarterback, who has been a top tier quarterback for a large part of his career, can get back to actually just making plays instead of having to think too much. Yeah. And like you said, Rabbi, there's a reason Josh McDaniels is probably better served being an offensive coordinator. And when he was widely considered the best in the game. Part of that had to do with having, TB12 as the guy, as your trigger man, but it's just, he's not shown that he can be a head coach. Like you said, I don't think he's ever going to get to the point, no matter how many more opportunities he may get, where like Daboll, he's going to go, I know I can run an offense, but I'm the head coach. I have a bigger picture to watch over. Let me find a guy who I can put my faith in to run an offense, even if it's not exactly the same as the offense I ran, somebody who I feel I can meld concepts with and, get on the same page philosophically, schematically and all of that. I don't know that Josh Daniels is ever going to get to that point. Okay. And like you said, right now, other than Max Crosby, is anyone on that defense doing anything? It's
just not the same team. It just doesn't have the same feel as it did last year.
I'll tell you this. They may have been better, sir, as much as McDaniels is the big name hire. And Mark
They should have kept Bisaccia.
Right.
They should have kept Bisaccia.
Yes,
They
that's
should
exactly where I was going with it.
Thing.
Yes, this is exactly where I was going with it. Because Mark Davis, unfortunately, channeled the worst impulses of his late father, where you got to make the big splash, where the Raiders just win, baby. No, I don't. Maybe McDaniel somehow gets a second year out of this because Davis doesn't.
Second year, I think. If
Davis doesn't want to look because for Davis knows it's bad optics you firing him after one season. But I tell you this, if the type of hesitancy we're seeing out of Derek Carr and this trying to run this offense that we did not see last year, if he's in this same place next year with a complete year of being in that scheme under his belt, then I'll tell you this, if it's a choice between keeping a quarterback who has made plays in the past and you've already paired him with his favorite receiver of all time, or keeping Josh McDaniels, get rid of the coach, bring in somebody who is a better fit with Carr and Adams. You're wasting the prime you're wasting their prime.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely correct. But I do think if it's going to be one, it's going to possibly be both. Because like I said, you don't do a regime change by keeping the same quarterback. That's just not the way it should work. But we'll see. We'll see. I want to move on. Okay. Let's talk quickly about teams that we want to talk about in the second half of the year. We don't pick loser teams on this show. We pick winners. So we're going to do that right now. Jay, everybody always likes to talk about the 49ers, but Kyle Shanahan earlier in the show. His record isn't always sterling, but he does get the job done. Went to the NFC Championship last year and has a lot of that same core going again. Sometimes you see the good of this team. Sometimes you see the bad, but going into their bye against the Rams, good God, that good came out in Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah, and that trade is already paying dividends, and it may just be what gives them the NFC West. I mean, it's the most interesting division in the NFL at the midseason mark, but not for the reasons we thought back when we did our kickoff show in September. However, It will be one of the more interesting divisions to watch in the second half. And one of the big reasons, other than the one I just talked about in our previous segment, is the impact the 49ers acquiring all-pro running back Christian McCaffrey from the Panthers will have on both this team and the division for the rest of this season. Niners gave up a second-round pick in 23, a third-rounder and a fourth-rounder as well, and a fifth-rounder in 24 to get the versatile playmaker who, when healthy, which is an issue to keep an eye on, can put up MVP numbers like this stat line from 2019, his last full season. 287 carries, 1,387 yards, that's 4.8 a carry. 15 touchdowns on the ground, plus 116 receptions for 1,005 yards and another 4 TDs through the air. He was personally responsible for picking up 115 first downs. That's more than 7 per game that season. In comparison, the 49ers high first down guy last year, Deebo Samuel, not surprisingly, 72, 51 in the air, 21 on the ground, which is a lot and also tells you how epic McCaffrey's 2019 was. So far, that's the type of playmaking he's given the 49ers, even as his knowledge of the playbook is not at the same level as his teammates. In the 49ers' 31-14 Week 8 win over the Rams, McCaffrey had 18 carries for 94 yards on the ground. That's 5.2 a pop, and a touchdown. 8 catches on 9 targets for 55 yards through the air, 6.9 average, and a touchdown. And he tossed a 34-yard touchdown pass. First player to do that since LaDainian Tomlinson in 2005. 10 of his 27 touches resulted in a first down. Look, we know that Jimmy G can't carry this offense on his own every week, though the 49ers do have the number 2 pass offense per DVOA since he took over, and do everything, Deebo and tight end George Kittle needs some help, but I don't think anyone saw this type of a big swing being taken in season by the 49ers. So props for John Lynch. The threat McCaffrey brings with his ability to operate from both the backfield and being split out wide should open things up for the offense. Garoppolo, 21 of 25, 235 yards and 2 scores in that win over the Rams. He averaged 9.4 yards per attempt, and he put up a season-high 132.5 passer rating. Brandon Ayuk, who had 6 catches for 81 yards and a TD, stepped up in the absence of Samuel, who the Niners hope will be back after the bye. 49ers offense should be more of a force to be reckoned with coming out of that bye as McCaffrey gets more and more familiar with the playbook and Samuel comes back from that injury. Couple that with Nick Bosa and his 8.5 sacks, pacing a solid defense that is number 7 in the NFL per DVOA, number 5 in points allowed, number 1 in rush yards allowed, and number 10 in pass yards allowed. And this is the team to watch in the second half, Rabbi.
I'm a little concerned about Jimmy G, just because I do think he has a ceiling, and I think we've seen that a lot this year. There have been games where you could take a look at that Denver game, that Sunday night game, which is a fucking terrible game. Sorry. You could take a look at that game and you can just see there's times when you don't want to see him on the field, and but McCaffrey's health is also always going to be an issue. I know you talked about it beforehand because he can be a game player, but he has to be on the field for that to happen. But San Francisco gets hot. They get hot. However, you want to talk about a quarterback that has been doing something? How about a quarterback that is 6-0 whenever he finishes a game? And that's what Tua Tagovailoa and the team I'm watching for the Miami Dolphins have done in 2022. I don't know what to say. This has been a very big surprise to me, only because obviously we know our friend Nisa Petrilli very, very well. And I think we expect a lot of bad things to happen because that's all she's seen from her team in the last 20 to 25 years. But what we've seen on this team is, even though this team has had many defensive lapses over the last few weeks, their offense is next level over these last few weeks under the direction of Mike McDaniel. And there have been critics of him. He does look like almost like the guy who would be in the computer room drawing up the offense like a mad scientist.
Indeed.
He's done the job. And the pickup of Tyreek Hill, we panned it a little bit and said he's going to really, really miss Patrick Mahomes. The answer to that is absolutely freaking not.
Yeah.
Yes, he only has 3 touchdowns this year, but he has 5 games of over 140 yards, 190 in week 2 against their comeback win against Baltimore, where they were down 21 and they came back to win, 160 in a game against Cincinnati where he wasn't even having Tagovailoa throwing in enough to him all of the time, 177 against Minnesota, 188 against Detroit, 143 against Chicago. He is almost at 1,000 yards in just
over.
He's over now. Sorry, he's at 1,011, I think. He's insane. And it seems like, as I said before, if the Rodgers-Adams marriage has just been a terrible disaster with them being broken up, I think we should see other people break up between Mahomes and Hill. It's worked out just fine for both sides, and it's really brought a new dimension to them in their career. And the crazy thing about the Dolphins is this. Jalen Waddle is probably the best number 2 option of anybody in the NFL. He has over 800 yards this year, and he's basically picked up the touchdown slack that Hill hasn't done. He has 6 touchdowns this year so far. And outside of Mike Gesicki, who has 238 yards and 4 touchdowns, there's really no number 3 threat in this team. It's basically you're throwing it up to Hill, you're throwing it up to Waddle, and they're making the play. Mm-hmm. Running game has been almost non-existent. They basically traded away Chase Edmonds for nothing. They got him from Arizona in the offseason. He did nothing. They got Jeff Wilson Jr. back. He scored a touchdown today against Chicago. But I think the real story of this whole entire team is Tua. A lot of people were panning. A lot of people were trying to bring Deshaun Watson in the offseason to be a guy to run this offense. And all Tua has done is said, up yours, basically, to the entire Miami organization. Yeah. He has a 115.9 passer rating. He completes almost 70% of his passes. He throws for 282 yards a game. He is a 15-3 touchdown to interception ratio. He has thrown accurate balls, but when you have the guys who can get it for him, and they said, here's the guys, do your thing. He's done his thing, and he's really earned himself a future as the guy who was Miami's quarterback. One thing that I want to talk about, since we're going to get off the NFL after this topic, but one thing I've noticed this year, and I wanted to bring it up, but we had limited time with Joe, is you notice these guys like Daniel Jones, you notice these guys even like Tua, there were not people who were playing to his strengths. Tua plays to his strengths when you have playmakers around him. That's what happened in Alabama. That's what made him the best. He could use his skills and use them to his advantage. Not everybody can make it work. He can. There's really good people who work in systems. Gino is a big example this year of what's going on in Seattle. Daniel Jones is a huge example of what's going on this year in New York. They make plays. And that's what Miami is doing. They're implementing a system, and it's working. They play Buffalo in the second half of the year. They play the Jets in the last game of the season, have another game against New England. Miami could very well be the greatest show on earth and could be appointment television watching in the second half of this season. I love watching this team play, and I cannot wait to see them. That's why they're my second half team to watch.
Yeah, and you know what, Rob? I was one of those who did not see this coming. Mike McDaniel, granted, he comes from the tree he comes from, and but you have a rookie head coach, you have a quarterback who has kind of struggled to stay healthy and be, make plays, do that, go more than 5 yards beyond the line of scrimmage. You looked at that scheme last year and you're like, yeah, that's why I kind of didn't think that adding Hill was really going to do much. But you know what? I got to give McDaniel all the credit in the world. He's been creative. He's been inventive. He's put his players in positions where they're plays to their strengths. And he's let Tua, you're right, he has gone back to being the quarterback that we're seeing throwing the ball up and down the field right now is the kid we saw who came off the bench and was, gunslinged Alabama to a national title. You're seeing that kid again. I mean, 21 to 30, 302 yards, 10.1 per throw, 3 scores today. I mean, he was literally lighting it up, and he's been doing it all season. So, all props to what McDaniel has managed to do in Miami. And I'm going to say it, he's resurrected, the version of Tua Tagovailoa that we saw at Alabama. And that guy is appointment watching if you're a fan of quarterback play.
And again, this team is appointment watching. They really have a swagger amongst themselves. You can hate them, but you know what? I really like them every time I see them out there. So we'll see what we can see. We'll see from them in the second half of the year. All right, on to baseball. And we'll talk about, give props to the Astros. Took care of the rest of baseball and got themselves back to the top of the mountain, winning a World Series last night. Jay will talk a little bit about Dusty Baker at the end. But the Yankees season ended 2 weeks ago, and we're still depressed about it. So Brian Cashman and Aaron Boone had a press conference this week. We have some free agency stuff going up. We'll talk a little bit about that in a second, but we're going to play doctor and diagnose how we would take this 2022 offseason for the Bronx Bombers. Let's answer some questions, 2 each for both of us. Jay, the easiest question of all, why should the Yankees re-sign the new AL home run king, Mr. Aaron Judge?
It's simple. And it really just comes down to this. Hal Steinbrenner needs to leave his usual conservative nature at home, channel his dad's King George nature, and just back the Brinks truck up, as Anthony said, open up the doors, apologize to their de facto captain for the mess that he and GM Brian Cashman made of the extension negotiation this spring, and pay Aaron Judge whatever it takes to keep him in the Bronx for the rest of his career. He is too valuable for the brand on and off the field, and Judge has not changed his tune about wanting to be a Yankee even after the team was swept by the Astros in the ALCS. Judge, who will likely be the AL MVP, we'll know soon now that the World Series is over and the awards can be handed out, put up one of the most ridiculous walk-year seasons in baseball history. Slash line, 311, 425, 686, 1.111 OPS, AL single season record 62 home runs, American League leading 131 RBI, 211 OPS plus, 391 total bases, 133 runs scored, and 111 walks. Yes, he didn't have a great postseason, but then again, A, no one in the lineup save Harrison Bader had a good postseason, and 2, the Yankees don't make the postseason if not for Judge. Cashman said the following thing about Judge this past week in that press conference that the rabbi just referenced. Here's the quote. Those are types of players you want to retain and have as long as you possibly can, and it involves a lot of different categories. You want a team that can compete for a championship and ultimately win a championship, and a player like him would help you do that as we move forward. George Steinbrenner would say he's going to drive fannies in the seats. People want to go watch that guy play. You want to put great teams out in the field that they want to watch compete for wins, but certain individual players transcend the team, and everything stops when they're at bat or have the ball in their hands. 100%. Aaron Judge is the continuation of the most recent pinstripe lineage and legacy that started with Don Mattingly and was carried on by Derek Jeter. And if the Yankees allow Judge to leave, the fan base may just tear down the house that Jeter built. And Rabbi, we may have to take a camera crew down to 161st and River to cover for all posterity one of the absolutely worst decisions this organization has ever made. They need to get this deal done and get it done forthwith, whatever it takes. You hear me, Hal? Whatever it takes.
You just said it perfectly. The brand needs him. Even if you're not, I think you could still get a lot of home runs from the man. I don't think he's going to ever disappoint, at least that yet. But the brand needs him, especially after a 62 home run season. Him wearing San Francisco brown or, God forbid, Mets blue is just not an answer at all. No. Okay, so the easiest question, shockingly, of this offseason is what you're going to do with the starting rotation. it's going to remain pretty much the same because
Key
Garrett Cole
question
was
got
locked up
answered
long.
today, this
Yeah.
week, actually.
Yeah, well, yeah, they got answered. Well, we'll talk about that in a second. But Garrett Cole locked up long term, had a very good postseason. He's safe. He is not, and I don't think any Yankee fan is going to kill him for his postseason contributions. They had a very good season versus the Guardians, and everybody's up against the Astros. Nestor Cortez has been this team's number 2 guy and is going to get a big raise in the offseason due to arbitration. Luis Severino had his $50 million option exercised. That's pretty obvious that he's still around. And Domingo Germán is going to probably take over that 4th spot. But the only real question is 2 things. One, what to do with Jameson Taillon, because Taillon has been hit or miss, but you saw some good things out of him this year that could get you a quality number 5 guy, which I think Taillon could be, is in this point of his career. And this is not the biggest concern for the New York Yankees. I mean, I'm sure everything ends up becoming a big concern because that's how this is sometimes in baseball. One thing ends up going past the other. There's really no real big free agent on the starting pitching market. Chris Bassitt coming here. That's for sure. He'll be a big name. Charlie Morton, Carlos Rodon is a big name, and I don't think I would be willing to break the bank for him. If you're going to break the bank, there's other options to break the bank for. He is certainly not one of them. Do you want to get someone like that? You can get someone like that. You can, but I don't think that it's a huge concern. I don't think this team is going to be 5 wins better than if you just kept Frankie Montas and see what you have with him before you do something with him. I know Yankee fans weren't happy with the way he performed after the trade deadline, but there's another season and there's going to be a lot less expectation on him going into 2023. Starting rotation is fine. I don't think it's too much of an issue.
No, I mean, the only concern for me, Rabbi, with Montas is whether or not he falls into that category of guys who are just not capable of playing here. And you and I both know there's a long and I don't want to say storied, but notorious history of big name free agents who've been brought here. They put up big numbers elsewhere and they've just crumbled under the bright lights of the big city. They're just not capable of pitching in this environment. The most recent one was Sonny Gray, who, has pitched well elsewhere, just was not capable of doing it here. Ed Whitson is always on that all-time list of guys who just could not.
Okay, let's get out of this now. You just outdated this whole show. I need to get back into. The point I'm trying to make, Rabbi, and I'll get out of it,
is whether Frankie Montas is going to be the next guy on that list. And what I saw from him in the limited amount of time he threw after he came over in the trade deadline. Right now, I'm starting to lean towards, he's the next guy on that list. He needs to show me otherwise.
I don't believe that list exists as much as you think, but we can talk about this another day, at least in 2021 and beyond. Okay. Jay, one domino fell today for the New York Yankees when it comes to bullpen help. What do they need to do with the bullpen? Do they have a closer that they can go to, or do they need to upgrade?
Was almost as bad. The lack of consistency and defined roles coupled with the injuries, made this the most chaotic bullpen situation of the Aaron Boone era. Aroldis Chapman lost his stuff, never really got it back, got an infection from a tattoo, and ended his time as a Yankee by acting the fool, as Anthony's fond of saying. Clay Holmes was lights out prior to the All-Star break, but was a lightweight after it, to the point where he couldn't be trusted to lock down the 9th inning. Injuries cost the Yankees Zach Britton, Chad Green, Michael King early, Scott Efros and Ron Marinaccio late. Guys like Clark Schmidt were put in leverage situations they shouldn't have been in because the alternatives after Jonathan Loaisiga and Wandy Peralta were slim. The Yankees will lose Britton, Green, and Miguel Castro to free agency. Britton rushed back from Tommy John surgery and was ineffective in his 3 outings. He could make sense on a heavily incentive-based 1-year type of deal, but I wouldn't really do much more than that until and unless he shows he's back to form. Green's likely out for most of next season as he rehabs from Tommy John surgery. Castro's an interesting option, but they have younger guys like Greg Weissert who can fit the same middle inning or blowout guy role. The key to the offseason plan will be how much faith they have in Holmes. In my opinion, closer is the one spot in the bullpen that cannot be in doubt. With that in mind, if they have any doubt that the pre-All-Star break version of Holmes is who he'll be next season, and maybe even if they don't, I'd still go after a closer. The Mets' Edwin Diaz was as dominant in 2022 as he was expected to be when he came to Queens from Seattle. 3-1, 131 ERA, 32 of 35 in save situations, 0.839 whip, and he struck out 17.9 per 9. And obviously, he was one of the most sought-after free agents on the market. The only other legit free agent closer is Kenley Jansen, who converted 41 of 48 save opportunities for the Braves. He had a 3.38 ERA, struck out 85 in 64 innings. That's a 12 per 9 strikeout rate. And he kept his average velocity from the previous year on all of his pitches, fastball, slider, cutter. Jansen has had his rough patches, but he has a lot of big games in a big market with big expectations experience from his time with the Dodgers. So if the Yankees can't get Diaz, and now that the Mets reportedly given him a 5-year, $102 million contract, which I found out right before we came on the air, they won't be able to. So Jansen isn't a bad alternative if you want to pivot in that direction. Yes, getting Marinaccio, who had a great rookie season, and Yankees need to have a legitimate lockdown option at the back end of the bullpen. Boone cannot be mixing and matching like this when games and the season are on the line, and next year they will be once again.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you asked any Brave fan what the biggest headache for them this season, even though he was good, kind of like Edwin Diaz's early seasons, it was Kenley Jansen. So he could have a renaissance a little bit to being like the shutdown guy here in New York. But if you're looking for the next Mariano Rivera or Aroldis Chapman circa 4 or 5 years ago, I don't think they're finding that on the market. That, for all of the complaints about this team going too youthful at times, that's somewhere where I don't think it should be too much of a problem, but that's just my opinion. There could be a lot of different things, but again, a lot of bigger issues. I think the biggest issue, though, at least as we saw in the offseason, good freaking God, was the lineup. The lineup was just a disaster in really both the Guardians and the Astros series, and just the fact that there just weren't hits to be found in both series. And I think it really comes down to a couple of questions. It's what dead weight do you need to get rid of? And I think Josh Donaldson, Aaron Hicks, and unfortunately Isaiah or kind of Falefa are probably going to be the 3 biggest. Donaldson is going to be trade bait, and I think it's the obvious choice because you can't have that much of a liability in your lineup, especially in big games. I think he just didn't prove himself a lot during the season. He has power, but he really has the power of hitters who just strike out too much in tough situations. Obviously, Carpenter, you're going to get rid of. That was a good story for a while, but he's just not that healthy all of the time. Aaron Hicks, there is, I feel like, some value for him, but unfortunately, I think it's almost like a Gary Sanchez situation. There's a time and a place when it's just going off of the rails, and I think this is really, really going off of the rails. I think this is going to be a disaster if you keep him, and if you're going to keep him, you're probably going to keep him digging deep on your bench. So I think he's gone, and I think the confidence going into out of the postseason for Isaiah kind of Falefa, who had a decent season in terms of hitting at the right times, a lot better in the first half than he was in the second half. Then again, a lot of Yankees were a lot better in the first half than were in the second half, unless you're Aaron Judge. You're going to need an upgrade in that. And if there's one place where they're going to need to really spend money, that's where you're probably spending your money on a big. And
I'm going to disagree with you.
Shortstop. Wait, can I move this in? Let me finish. I know you're going to disagree with me on that, but I think they need at least 1 or 2 big time bats. I don't think they can hold on to straws in this lineup, because you saw in the second half of the season, they were just kind of fading a lot. And that's why Aaron Judge is the true MVP. And I almost think should be a unanimous MVP because of the way he carried that team on his back to make sure that they didn't lose in AL East, which was very much for the losing in the second half of the season. I would re-sign Benintendi because you don't necessarily know what you have with him, and you can probably get him for a lot cheaper than you thought you could. I would, obviously, you're going to get a full year of Harrison Bader. And even though Rizzo opted out, his metrics defensively are a little bit better than there should be. And he is in a perfect stadium for him. Rizzo is somebody I would take a little bit more money for. I would honestly keep Gleyber Torres. There's a lot of people that want him gone in terms of you can get him, or you can still have some value with him, but I think there's still value with Gleyber that I think people need to be patient with. But there are holes in this lineup, and I don't necessarily know the people who are to fill them. And I know you want to kind of get into kind of Falefa and how they need to be patient with him, but
no, not him.
Okay, there's not a lot of patience left on this team, and I think there needs to be a more consistent lineup, especially in the era where you're never going to have a pitcher hit. You need 6 to 7 consistent guys, and they don't have that right now, Jay.
No, I agree with you on that. I agree with you that they need to re-sign Benintendi. I think my concern, I think if DJ is healthy, that's your starting.
DJ is a big thing too, but I think DJ is something you're going to have to live with. You're not getting rid of DJ. You're going to have to find out what you have with DJ. That's obvious. That's something I need to say.
I think if he's healthy, he's starting at third base. He's not necessarily playing 150 games there, but he's starting at third base. I think Cabrera has earned himself a role on this team, whether it's starting at shortstop or playing in a million different positions, 4 or 5 times a week. As much as my whole thing with the shortstop position, I think Kiner Falefa is gone. I think the kid got the short end of the straw. Unfortunately, he was always going to be a guy, because whether it's Cabrera there next year or it's Peraza, or you decide sometime after the All-Star break that Anthony Volpe is ready to come up, the Yankees are no longer going to block those guys. Volpe is one of the most highly touted shortstop prospects, not just in the Yankee system, but in any farm system. So as much as in terms of the short term, would love to bring Trey Turner to New York and have that guy playing shorts,
that's not going to happen.
That's who I would want if I was going to take one of these guys. The Yankees need to have the shortstop position temporarily filled until they're ready to see what Volpe has. So I think shortstop is going to be somewhere between Cabrera, Peraza, or Volpe. I don't think the Yankees are going to shell out big bucks for one of the big free agent shortstops, especially if they're going to have to open up the Brinks truck for Judge. And that is the key. Remember, as much as Hal Steinbrenner has opened up the wallet to get guys like Garrett Cole, he still has a limit, something his dad never had, but he has a limit in terms of how much of that Yankee money he is willing to shell out. So if it takes all the money in Fort Knox to pay Aaron Judge, and I personally have said they should, I don't know that you have enough left over to really pay one of those free agent shortstops, whether it's Bogarts, whether it's Turner, whether it's Carrera, whoever. Okay. But that's why I firmly believe that, you're going to have to get through next year at shortstop and see what you have. That said, I agree with you. Falefa's gone. Donaldson needs to be gone. Hicks needs to be gone. Those guys are albatrosses. Carpenter's an interesting story, but if he's gone, I understand the reasoning why. Yes, you definitely re-sign Rizzo for all the reasons you mentioned, and one more. With the shift going away basically next year, a lot of his outs are going to be base hits.
I'm also very curious of, is a Nimmo or Conforto a guy who could really make it in New York? Because those are really the outfielders that I could see outside of Benintendi. Benintendi, I think, is a given, but I do think that I just think that there's no utility guys left in the market. I agree. They don't need to pay for another shortstop.
They don't need one. They have Cabrera.
They have what they needed that, but I think that, like I said, I think the consistency needs to be there And I knew this team wasn't consistent going into the year. I continuously
No.
told you that they were consistent going into the year because they were the same team that lost in the wild card pretty much the previous year, just with more experience. They gained that experience.
Nimmo's an interesting idea because if you don't get Benintendi back, he's an interesting choice because he fills the left field slot, which you kind of need someone who's a center fielder basically to play left field in Yankee Stadium. And two, he fills the leadoff slot.
Yeah.
So
but again,
if they lose Benintendi, I'd go after Nimmo because I think Nimmo, as much as Nimmo wants to get paid, I still think what he wants and what he figures is getting paid for the Yankees would still be reasonable.
All right. One more thing we have to talk about tonight, actually, a bunch more things, but we're going to talk about college basketball real quickly because wear that shirt very proud because good God, we'll have a very good talk about North Carolina in just a second. Hello, friends. College basketball begins their season in earnest this week, and it will end in April as Jim Nantz calls his final four in Houston, the place where he was born, so it makes sense. So quickly, Jay, we're going to talk 1 and 2, and then we'll talk some surprises or teams that we are really, really interested in going into this season. Okay. Surprising tournament run from Hubert Davis last year. You couldn't ask for a better first act in Chapel Hill. And now the expectations are so high. They had UNC recreate a Sports Illustrated cover to basically say, here are your favorites for 2023. So from no expectations to all expectations, what is the storyline going in for North Carolina going into this year? Big year.
I hate it when there are these types of expectations for a team I root for. It makes the
considering my Sixers expectation thing is gone beforehand, it really hasn't done real well so far.
We'll see what happens when Harden gets back. However, the college basketball analyst in me sees who's back and who's come aboard, and it's understandable why the folks at AP, USA Today, and college hoop experts like Seth Davis have last season's national runner-up atop the preseason polls. Tar Heels were the nation's number 35 team through February 28th per Bartovik's efficiency rankings. Very much the 8th seed they were given for the NCAA tournament. Somehow, once the calendar flipped to March, the Heels flipped the switch and became the number 1 team in the nation per those same metrics and made it all the way to the national title game before losing to the Kansas Jayhawks. Hubert Davis gets back his starting backcourt team of RJ Davis, 13.5 points per game, and Caleb Love, 15.9 points per game. Love, who if legendary trainer Drew Hanlen is to be believed, is much improved and is ready to wreak all-American level havoc on the ACC and the nation. He also gets back 2/3 of last year's front court in forward Leaky Black, who's one of the nation's best defenders at 6'80", as the ideal length to reasonably guard any position, making him a Swiss Army knife type of player. Per hoop lens, Black was the team's best individual defender on a points per possession allowed basis last season. He gave up just 0.84 points per possession to opponents, and he's also one of UNC's team leaders. He's back for his, I think, COVID super senior season.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's Armando Bacot, the ACC preseason player of the year, who should have been last year's actual ACC player of the year, in my opinion, with the history-making double-double season he had, 16.3 points, 13.1 boards. Bacot should become UNC's all-time leading rebounder sometime in January and could be in the National Player of the Year conversation. Then North Carolina lands Pete Nance, a 6'10 super senior from Northwestern via the transfer portal, who shot 45.2% from 3 last season. You remember, the one guy they lost off last year's Iron 5 was Brady Manick, who knocked down threes at a prolific level. Nance's proficiency, however, on the pick and roll, 20.3% of his total offensive possessions were pick and roll. He averaged 1.381 points per possession on the PNR, which rated 98th percentile nationally, which includes both the traditional rolls to the basket and the pick and pop threes. That will open up a part of the Carolina playbook that they rarely used last season. Only 4.4% of their offensive possessions were pick and roll. Add to that Hubert Davis's adjustments on defense late last season, which helped spur the Final Four run and should carry over to this season with the improvement on then of Davis, Love, and Bacot. the addition of Nance and Seth Trimble, the team's highly touted freshman guard who comes in with a reputation of applying on-ball pressure and the usual play of black. And this might be a more complete team than the one we saw in March. Think about this, Rabbi. If Pete Nance is your best player, as he would have been had he stayed at Northwestern, that team's probably going to be pretty good. If he's your team's fifth best player, as he will be at North Carolina, that team has a pretty good chance to win a national championship. So, yeah, maybe the hype should be believed. Maybe.
I tell you, and I had this discussion with a friend yesterday, kind of bringing it to college football just for a second when you were talking about the transfer portal. The transfer portal has really been the great equalizer in both college football and college basketball, because the teams that are on the high end of the national title picture, like Alabama and Clemson, Alabama's on some people in the transfer portal, but the reason the transfer portal exists is because Alabama was too deep to actually start you in the first place. And because you're a four-star recruit, you go to another team. And that's where you get people like Hayden Hooker, who was not really ready to do anything in Virginia Tech until yesterday, had a great run in Tennessee. It's where you get a guy like Jaden Daniels, who did nothing in Arizona State, but you put him in Brian Kelly on offense at LSU, and look how it goes for them. I mean, to bring it back, though, to North Carolina, this is their load-up season, my friends, and the ACC is weak in most spots, but not with Duke, which we'll talk about in just a second. Gonzaga is number 2 in the nation, but this is a different number 2. This is not a solid number 2. Oh, that were on my part, so that's not a spoiler alert. This is my pick. Yes, but for Duke that was. But for Gonzaga, Drew Timme is still here. Is still in college basketball and has 1,521 points in a Gonzaga uniform, and you get all of that back again. He had 18.4 points last season, 19 2 years ago, and he'll probably end up being the Zags' all-time leading scorer when everything is said and done this year, if he just averages that again. But they lost Chet Holmgren and Andrew Nebar did Gonzaga to the NBA draft. However, the lofty projections of Gonzaga this year isn't because of what they have talent-wise, what they have experience-wise. And while that's all talented and good, they actually are going to be able to make a run this year with players who know each other this year. Bolton is back, and Strouser is back. He is a shooter and scorer almost everywhere around the court. He was in a lot of spots in NBA mock drafts, and that's why he was one of the rare people who decided they're going to come back. Malachi Smith is still back. Dominic Harris is back. Hickman is going to be the biggest name in that book, though. He is a quiet point guard. He was under the tutelage of Andrew Nebar this season. And Hickman was bringing the ball at the court, but Nebar is still the person who runs this offense. Now, there's a lot of different storylines going there with Gonzaga. Obviously, the West Coast Conference is not going to get the most respect in basketball, but the rumors are very prevalent that Gonzaga is about to move to the Big 12, and that's already gotten a lot of people intrigued. Ears up, perking up. But the one thing that is very interesting is the shit that has been already given to them. Bob Huggins, who never misses the opportunity to insult anybody who's not part of his old college basketball Jerry Westlake system, basically said Gonzaga's going to struggle in the Big 12. You fucking kidding me, Jerry? You're in West Virginia. West Virginia doesn't know offense the way it is before. So the Big 12 stuff will continue. Usually that means the circa Louisville Big East their last year. They might just run the table again in the WCC, get a high seed going into the tournament, and they're going to always have those pressure on them because the one thing Gonzaga's never done is seal this with a national championship. They can be a 20-loss, 10-loss team making the tournament for all they care. They seal it with a national championship. Mark Few has finally gotten that complete saga finishing. Less pressure on them, but the goal remains the same. We'll see what happens. Gonzaga is always a story to watch in college basketball. This year is no different. All right. Well, I do my research for the next surprise that I'm going to talk about. Now let's get over to Duke. As Jay, the John Shire era begins in Duke in earnest. Great recruiter, still has the number 7 team in the nation. I talked about Duke last year and how they could be a little bit under the radar, which had Holmgren around. They were probably the favorites going into the Final Four last year, made a nice little run. can Duke do it again? They got a very good recruiting class going with them this year. You do think they can surprise?
Well, they are my intriguing team to watch.
Intriguing team, yes, but you think they can really surprise?
Well, yeah, I mean, Duke's first season ACK after Coach K and after this happened, with handpicked successor John Shire at the helm, was always going to be an intriguing one. Shire knows the program inside and out from his decade-plus time there as a player and an assistant coach, but he's never called the shots before. So how he handles that, especially with a team that has one returning rotational player in junior guard Jeremy Roach, will be something to keep an eye on. They have 11 new players. Excuse me, 7 of them are freshmen, are the freshmen who gave Duke the nation's #1 recruiting class. 2 of the most highly touted of those freshmen are dealing with injuries at the moment. 6'7" forward Derek Whitehead had surgery on August 30th after fracturing his right foot in practice. Shire expects him to return sometime this fall, but that may not actually happen until conference play starts. 7'1" center Derek Lively II is day-to-day with a calf injury. That's the same injury that kept him out of the team's preseason event, basketball event, the Countdown to Craziness in October, as well as its secret scrimmage at Houston this past weekend. But he could possibly be ready in time for Monday night's opener, but it'll be a game time decision. Honestly, with all the new faces and having to incorporate these guys, we may not know who this team will be until ACC play starts and Shire has the entire team at his disposal. Will they be the top 10 team that, AP, USA Today, Seth Davis, and others think they are? Who knows? Right now, there are too many unknowns, but as this Tar Heel fan knows, it is never wise to bet against the team 8 miles away in Raleigh-Durham.
My intriguing team, very quickly, is the Houston Cougars out of Conference USA. They are a top 5 team to start the season, and they're really going to be a lot better this year because they have their whole entire starting lineup back. Jamal Sheed is going to be back as junior. He was a third-team AAC guy last year. He can give you 10 points a game. There is just so much on this team. Obviously, you have Trayvon Mark. He was a 10-point-game guy. You got a recruiter, the biggest addition in Jarace Walker. He will become a very, very strong physical guy who is going to play the 4 probably as good as any player in the country. It's a guard-heavy offense, too, which makes his addition so important on the boards and making sure that this team has balance. But, of course, this is going to end up Marcus Sasser, who was 17.7 points a game last season and had his year cut very, very short. He went 43% from 3 last year. He was a better defensive player. You're going to see him have a chance for the Wooden Award this year if he stays healthy. Schedule is pretty there. They do have some good non-conference games. They'll have Oregon, they'll have St. Mary's, they'll have Alabama, but the AAC is going to be their conference. They'll have challenges. Tulane's pretty good. UCF is pretty good, but they have a very good potential of being a 1 seed going into the tournament. And they were probably, obviously, this Calvin Fancy team is not really offensively inclined in many different ways, but they were one good offensive stretch away from getting to the Final Four last year and being there instead of the team that beat them in Villanova. So I really, really like Houston this year. And if a mid-major like Gonzaga, who is heading to the Big 12, isn't going to make a run, I mean, Houston's not really a mid-major. How about another team that's going to head to the Big 12 in 2023, making a run at their final year in the AAC? Houston is the team to watch.
All right.
Can I do the setup here?
We got to do Final Four predictions, man. I've been curious.
I want you to go first. That's why.
Okay.
I want you to go first. Thank God Anthony's not here because I think we all know how we do with predictions on this
show. Fair enough. Oh, you want me to go first? All right.
I do want you to go first. Yeah.
All right. All right. UNC, for all the reasons I noted in our previous segment, yes, even though the fan in me hates expectations on my team, and UNC hasn't had expectations this high in 5 years. It's hard for the analyst in me to temper them with all the weapons the Heels have at their disposal this season. 4 returning starters, 2 potential All-Americans, a 4-year stretch forward with NBA lineage. Yes, Pete Nance is the son of Larry Nance, the all-star for the Phoenix Suns, and more depth than Hubert Davis could dream of last season. Gonzaga, for all the reasons the rabbi noted just previously. And we just expect Mark Few to reload when he loses players now that Spokane is a tier 1 basketball destination, whether you're coming in as a 5-star recruiter via the transfer portal, like 6'4" senior guard Malachi Smith, who averaged a little under 20 points a game for a 27-win Chattanooga team that almost knocked Illinois out of the NCAA tournament last year. Kentucky. Cats are returning the consensus National Player of the Year in big man Oscar Tshiebwe. He averaged 17.4 points and 15.2 boards, 28 double D3 to be as prolific in both categories. He had more rebounds last season than any Division I player since 1974. The Cats also returned senior point guard Severe Wheeler, who has led the SEC in assists each of the last 2 seasons, along with senior forward Jacob Toppin, brother of the Knicks Obi, who averaged 16.8 points in the Bahamas event at the beginning of the season and seems poised for a breakout year this year. Add to that, you got sophomore forward Damian Collins, a former 5-star recruit who can jump out of the gym. And UK getting back a healthy CJ Frederick, the senior 2-guard, made 46.6% of his threes in 2 seasons at Iowa before transferring over. John Calipari has also added sharpshooter Antonio Reeves, a 20 per game scorer last season from Illinois State, via the portal, and signed 2 more McDonald's All-Americans in Cason Wallace, and Chris Livingston. Finally, I'm going to join Rabbi and go with Houston for all the reasons he noted in our previous segment. And I agree with him that the return to form of senior guard Marcus Sasser, who was playing at an All-American level before his season ended in late December with that broken foot, will be what a lot of us will be focusing on for a Cougars team coming off that Elite 8 appearance last year.
I'm going to go, okay. I'm going to go Houston exactly for the reasons that I just said, and because I don't want to be on the other side of history in terms of what was being said beforehand. I think, like I said, I think the schedule looks easy. I do expect a possible number 1 overall ranking for Houston. I'm going to go with Kentucky. I think that's the most talented team, one of the most talented teams going into this season. And I don't think Calipari is going to have 2 bad NCAA runs in him. After what happened last year with St. Peter's, that's not happening twice. I think Oscar Tshiebwe is going to be the best player of the country and is going to be a dominant player. And as long as they manage him correctly, he doesn't get injured and he plays his best ball pretty much the whole entire year. I'm going Creighton out of the Big East. Most experienced team left. They look a lot better than I think I've ever seen them look. And they're going to be a top 10 ranked team. They're going to be the team who is going to be favored in the Big East. Again, Jay Wright leaving Villanova is going to open up the Big East a lot. Yeah. But I think if there's a guy that's going to help a team being a front runner rather than the team that they have been in the past, it's going to be Creighton. They've almost beaten Kansas in the tournament last year as a depleted team, but they got Baylor Scheinman from South Dakota State. They have the Summit League Player of the Year. They have 3 starters who made the Big East All Freshman team last year, and a junior center last year that was the Defensive Player in the Year. So I think Arthur Kalema, Ryan Nebhart, Trey Alexander, Francisco Farbella, Sharif Miller, these are all pieces together for Creighton, and I think they'll have a big run. But if you have the hype like North Carolina has, I don't think they're going to miss. I think that the ACC is weak. I think the ACC has a lot of work to do in terms of its overall depth. And I think North Carolina can prey on that very easily. Even if they don't prey on that and they end up as a disappointing 2 seed or a 3 seed, I don't want to face that team in the tournament, especially with the run that they had last year in the tournament. So North Carolina, Houston, Kentucky, and Creighton is my final 4.
All right.
All right. Very, very quickly. We have a little bit of time left. We have so much to talk about with the Brooklyn Nets, who they're on a 2-game winning streak, so they're not as much of a clusterfuck they were when they wrote this a couple of days ago. But the clusterfucks have just been one after the other, and that's not even including Ben Simmons' start this year, which has been, he's already injured. He hasn't scored in double figures in any of his games. He's been a better defensive player, but his confidence is gone. He's been yelled at by teammates for not shooting too much. And frankly, that part of the fit, we'll put that over to the side. We'll keep it in a lockbox, and we'll talk about that in the future. So I want to talk about 3 quick topics over here. I want quick thoughts. Number 1, Steve Nash has been fired. He got off to a pretty bad start for this team, and even after a win against Indiana on Monday night, a 2-6 start basically cost the man his job. Now, while I think he was celebrating on his way out the door, as I would be in this situation, bringing him back only for an 8-game stint doesn't seem like the best way to go about things, Jay. I don't think this firing was justified, but why was this firing unjustified?
Okay, well, first of all, and here's, how I feel about coaches getting fired after this small of a game sample. Most front office people in the NBA know that you need about 20 games or so to really kind of know what your team is, what they're not, and who they're likely to be. The reason everybody wants to, firing is not really the right word here, because Nash wasn't actually fired. Nash went in to Sean Marks's office, the Nets GM, and he basically told him, I think I've lost the team. I don't think they're listening to me anymore. I don't think me staying is going to help the team. So basically, he kind of fired himself, and Marks begrudgingly, because, he liked Nash, he hired him, let him go. And honestly, I agree with you, Rabbi. All of the agita and all of the insanity, which we're going to get into in a minute, Steve Nash doesn't need it. He doesn't need to be a coach in the NBA to do anything to improve his legacy or his resume. I think he will happily go back to, owning his soccer team and playing pickup soccer and, parks in Brooklyn, on the weekend, and he will enjoy retirement until such time as he decides, he wants to be part of an NBA team in some shape, manner, or form. The Nets are not necessarily better off without him, but I definitely think he's better off without the Nets. Jacques Vaughn is going to take the reins again as an interim guy, and you and I talked about whether
the next question.
I'm going to set. Like I said, I'm going to. Well, my next point's going to set you up. And you and I, we talked about this on the show when Kenny Atkinson was let go and Vaughn took over as interim coach and did such a good job. I think we all thought that he probably deserved a chance to get the head coaching job, and I still believe the man deserves to be a head coach in the NBA, but from, the rumors that are circulating, across the clickbait, areas of the Twitterverse, that may not happen, Rabbi.
Well, it's not the clickbait areas of the Twitterverse. These are real people who are making these assumptions, but it hasn't happened yet. But let me talk really quickly about the firing. It doesn't honestly matter who coaches this team, honestly, because in an interview, I don't remember what podcast it was. I don't know if it was Katie's podcast or if it was on somebody else's podcast. Katie and Kevin Durant basically said at the beginning of the season, this team runs itself. We don't need a coach. Even Jacques Vaughn, yes, it was stuff like that, could coach this team. You don't need a puppet. You don't need a figurehead. And honestly, you're right. Steve Nash did not need the agita. I don't think Nash, I'm very surprised Nash came back. If this was the situation that was going on, if he thought, again, we talked about the words before, definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. This is about that way. Last year was a complete disaster. The year before, you could at least salvage it by the fact of saying, even though you only had your 3 best players for 10 games during the entire season, playoffs continued, you were literally a toe away from probably getting to the NBA Finals. So you could take that, but there was nothing coming out of last season that I would have ever hanged my head on. And I was surprised Nash came back for that. But considering it seems like this is more mutual than we first thought, I think Steve Nash, and this needed to happen. Both sides needed to part ways, and we needed to get to a new coach. That new coach might be Ime Udoka, the guy who's been suspended for an entire year from the Boston Celtics due to what is initially mentioned as an illicit affair, but has gotten to many different possible things of workplace impropriety, sexual, basically deviance. Either way, Ime Udoka, while it's still being rumored, not there yet, still has been talked about, has a very good likelihood of being the next head coach of Brooklyn, and Boston would let him go without compensation, reportedly, which I want to get into that in a second. Jay, morally, is this right? Personally, no. Is this right?
Look, if you want to, and we've done this before on this show in various sports, looking at various, players that are under clouds for things that happened off the field. The most recent for us being, the whole Deshaun Watson, madness. Udoka's situation, if you want to look at it within, the 3-foot window of, just, the basketball end of it, would having Ime Udoka back in Brooklyn, where he was an assistant under Steve Nash and knows all of these guys, coming off the season he had, with the reputation he brings as somebody who is willing to call out even his best players. And he doesn't take anything from anyone. He doesn't care whether they're the highest paid or the lowest paid guy on his roster. And his chops as a defensive coach, an area where the Nets are severely lacking. From a basketball standpoint, would having this guy running your club be a positive? Yes, but we don't live in that 3-foot window. And I'm sorry, but if the Nets hire him, this guy was supposed to be suspended for an entire year. And I'm sorry, the rest of the NBA should respect that suspension. You go and hire him, and basically, that means all you've done is sent him to his room for a timeout and not let him have ice cream, with it because he didn't eat his vegetables. I mean, to me, that's as morally bankrupt as some of the other things we're going to get into with the Nets. There's a reason Boston suspended him. The fact that the Celtics seemingly might be willing to let him go without getting any type of draft compensation in return, to me, means the Celtics were never sure they wanted him back, and wanted to have the entire year to figure out, is the off the court stuff as much of a distraction as that's going to be? Is that juice worth the squeeze to have this guy back coaching this team after being suspended for a year? The fact that they're seemingly willing to let him go without any compensation leads me to believe that Brad Stevens and the ownership weren't going to bring him back. So they're just happy to get him as far away from Boston as possible, and in their minds, close the door on this thing. But here's the thing, though: if you let that guy coach after what he's only served 2 months of his suspension,
not even 10 games,
not even
maybe
yet.
10 or 11 games.
Right. So then what you're doing is it's a slap in the face of all of the female employees, both in Boston and in Brooklyn. And what type of message are you sending? It's, again, this is similar to the NFL welcoming back guys who've committed, crimes because they can either sack the quarterback, throw for touchdowns, or run it into the end zone. Now, Udoka's being a coach is not at that same level, but again, there's got to be a line somewhere. The Celtics suspended him for a year. The NBA, Adam Silver should make the rest of the NBA honor that suspension. And the fact that he hasn't put his foot down annoys the hell out of me.
I don't think that there's other trees for Adam Silver to climb.
Oh, without a doubt.
And I think what I honestly think of the situation is this: if the Celtics are not asking for compensation, because they can honor this suspension and say, no, you're not going to that team. So this is as much on the Boston Celtics as it is on the New York Nets, because here's what I think. And yes, what you said is perfectly true. The women in each organization is pretty much putting up a "we don't respect you" type scenario. It's more than a slap in the face. It's basically saying, here's a possible sexual predator. But if Boston lets him out of this contract, don't give Boston the benefit of the doubt because they're a better organization than the Nets and they just went to the NBA championship. Boston needs to explain why that suspension was a year. If that suspension was more a show, then it was a show. That's why they let him go. Perfectly fine. I still don't think he should be allowed to do anything, but I'm very curious of why you're not asking for compensation. Even if you're asking for compensation for him, don't make the decision to suspend him for a year anyway. Let him go. Let him fucking go, and let him go with his team. No one was going to hire him until this happened. So that's real. It's a weird situation to begin with before you get to the morality of the situation. And honestly, this has been swept under the rug a little bit because of part 3. Part 3 responds with Kyrie Irving. And I'm going to leave for a second and let you take the floor on this for a moment. But after posting on Twitter a link to, I'm not even going to say the documentary, or else that would actually give it more credence, and putting an Instagram post as part of the story and leading to it, Kyrie Irving basically promoted a anti-Semitic film while possibly being an anti-Semite.
Yeah.
While the organization, Joe Tsai, did put a I'm disappointed statement on this, and the NBA put a condemning hate speech statement on this, that just fueled Kyrie Irving even more to a defiant press conference, the first on October 29th, basically doubling down on his support on the film, and then basically mentioning a conspiracy theory from Alex Jones. He had actually played in a bunch of games, including an October 31st game against the Bulls, in a game where, even though he acted defiant, didn't look like he wanted to be there, continued to not apologize for that until he finally got suspended by the Nets for at least 5 games, and then the next hours later put up a suspension on Twitter. Jay, you have the floor, and I'll be back in just a second.
No, I want you to stay here, Rabbi. I want you to.
I have to go for a second, but I will hear it. But as a man and as a person, what do you think of this situation?
Well, I'm going to start this with our friend Anthony Strait, the third member of this trio, is on vacation in Amsterdam. But before Anthony left, he posted something on Facebook where he basically kind of laid out probably what would have been his comments in this segment, was that would he be here had he been here tonight. So I'm going to lead off with what he wrote. If you follow Anthony on Facebook, you should check it out. If you don't, I still think you should check it out. And here's what Anthony said. I will say this, and I will leave it as is. I feel Kyrie Irving has done a ton of good over the years off the court. I feel he is a very gifted athlete and a very smart human being. And while he, for whatever reason, won't just clear the air about it, I don't truly believe he's anti-Semitic. Now that's out of the way, I will say this. Kyrie Irving is a bullshit artist and an egomaniac who never takes any responsibility. I grew up with a few in my family, so I know one when I see one. Hell, at one point, it was me. And the moment he's called out for something, he's the victim. Oh, boo-hoo, everyone wants to silence him. How about grow the fuck up and be accountable? This isn't about his beliefs or politics. This is about a guy who won't take responsibility when he's wrong and never does, and that's going back a long time now. The biggest problem with the Nets isn't the coaches, the roster makeup, or even the GM. Everything negative about that team the last 4 seasons, Kyrie Irving has been at the absolute center of it all. The Nets need to cut their losses with him and Kevin Durant and move the hell on. Promoting any kind of hate rhetoric towards any one person or group is wrong. And the fact that with so much that have gone wrong in this country over the last several years, the fact that we have to keep having these discussions is disturbing. People are more than free to disagree with me, and it's their right to do so, but they can save the energy on debating me on it because it's not a topic of discussion. And the reason, Rabbi, that I wanted to read Anthony's piece first is because it leads into what I'm about to say. I have never been as angry with anything said or done by a professional athlete as I have been this week by what Kyrie Irving has said and done. I've been so mad that we're concerned about me because of the prolific amount of profanity I used in venting my anger in the group text that we share with Anthony. I've had a few days to calm down, so I should be able to lay out how I feel in my usual professional manner. Kyrie loves to put provocative things out into the world on his social media platforms, but take no responsibility for them, claiming that just because he mentioned something does not mean that he is either pro or con of said provocative thing. He loves to talk about how his people have been persecuted, victimized, and abused in the 400 years since they were brought here in chains to be slaves. On that, he is 100% correct. They have been, and it's beyond disgusting and heinous. And I fully agree with him and side with him on that. But my people who walked alongside his people with Dr. King have been persecuted, victimized, and abused for almost 6,000 years, from the pharaohs of ancient Egypt to the Roman Empire to the Spanish Inquisition in the 1400s to the Holocaust during World War II. So shut up about being dehumanized. To the Olympics in Munich in 1972, to the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh 4 years ago. How about you look up stuff related to all of that before you start putting hatred and lies into the world, you hypocrite? And as to whether you hurt anyone with that post and the doubling down you did on it in the Nets post-game presser afterwards, yes, you did, you ignorant, self-centered, egotistical jackass. You hurt every Jew in the city with the biggest Jewish population in the country. All of us have had at least one branch of the family tree that was destroyed by the Holocaust, an epic crime against humanity that people keep trying to say never happened to this day. So every time anti-Jewish hatred is put out into the world, which is flat out what you did, it emboldens all of the groups from neo-Nazis to Hamas to do more violence against Jews worldwide. The other reason I was this mad was that neither the Nets, Adam Silver, who is Jewish, nor the NBA rank and file said anything when this all came out. The only ones to call Kyrie out by name for what he said and did were Charles Barkley and Shaq on TNT. And it irritated them to no end that this happened and that they had to talk about it. It wasn't until Kyrie was suspended and fined that Adam Silver called Kyrie out directly or LeBron James said anything at all about what his former teammate had said and done. The apology Kyrie made happened only after getting suspended and fined. Sorry, I don't accept it. It didn't mean anything or matter to him until there were actual consequences. There is no place in the world, let alone the NBA, for this kind of hatred to be tolerated. Kyrie Irving needs to be removed from the NBA. What he did is tantamount to what Donald Sterling did. And if Donald Sterling has no place in the NBA, Adam Silver, then neither does Kyrie Irving. I am done with him.
I am done with him too. I don't compare it to Donald Sterling because Donald Sterling was a bigot and a racist. Kyrie Irving is exactly what you said, a jackass. And here's what you do with jackasses. You don't give them a fucking platform anymore. I will curse. You don't give them a platform anymore, and you don't put them in any spotlight. I will even compare this to a very good example. When Antonio Brown was excommunicado from the NFL last year, he did what he did, but you know what he became? He became a sideshow. And it's time for the man who has God-given basketball skills to become a sideshow for the rest of his career. Don't give him an NBA platform. Don't give him an NBA team to go on. Let him earn his $36 million at home doing whatever he does. He doesn't make an influence once his name recognition goes away. And once his name recognition goes away, he just becomes another stupid idiot. And honestly, that's what Kyrie Irving is, a stupid idiot who does not know how to be an employee, let alone an actual player of a team who is nationwide. And he is one of the most ignorant people I've ever met in my entire life. And he is not an anti-Semitic person. He is a selfish person. And honestly, in this day and age, selfish people need to have their consequences read to them. I don't know how this guy continues to be in NBA, to be in the position he's in, because people, for some fucking reason, respect him to the point where he was the vice president of the Players Association. Listen, I treat his words for what they are. And I know athletes have platforms and they make a big difference, and they make a big difference in the world and what they do. But when someone that says something like that, it makes me think you're just an athlete. And I don't want to say that like a shut up and dribble away. I mean, you bring away the contributions that sports have actually made to society, and you bring it back to you're just an athlete. And honestly, you need to be stripped of that athlete status, and you need to be just another asshole. Finally,
fair enough.
Jay, Dusty Baker is, I can't know why I can't transition that really well from those two. Jay,
I welcome the transition, partner.
Even though the Houston Astros ended up winning last night their second world title in 6 years and their first apparently clean title ever, that's what people will say. You judge for yourself. Jay, there's many people to be happy for. Before you mention Dusty Baker, mention the fact that Trey Mancini, who overcame cancer, is
That's
now a
great
World
story.
Series champion, made a huge play in Game 5 of the World Series in a
With his
position, by the
glove.
way,
With his glove of all things.
and it's a position that he didn't play for over a month and a half.
Yep.
So that is amazing. But the fact that Dusty Baker is finally a World Series champ after all he's been through in his career is just another story.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about other people. I'll get to Dusty in a second, but Rabbi, I'm on the other people that, you can be happy for. Look, as a Yankee fan, I'm never going to be happy that the Houston Astros as an entity are world champions, but there are a couple of people who I think, deserve some props. I'm happy for Justin Verlander, who finally got his first World Series victory after being 0-6 with a 5+ ERA in his previous trips. I'm happy for young Jeremy Pena. What a way to, end your rookie year, ALCS MVP and World Series.
Not just ending your rookie year, but being the person to replace Carlos Correa in the lineup and doing a damn good job at it, especially in the postseason.
Yep. Hitting every game in the World Series, getting, World Series MVP. And, and for Dusty, I mean, how can you not, just like, I kind of quote the line from Moneyball, how can you not be romantic about baseball? Dusty Baker is one of those guys where, that make you be romantic about baseball. I mean, think about these numbers. I pulled these off of Sports Center last night. 2,093 regular season wins, most at the time of the manager's first World Series victory. Oldest manager to win a World Series, 73 years old. Third Black manager to win a World Series after Dave Roberts in 2020, Cito Gaston in 92 and 93. And he won the 1981 World Series as a player with the Dodgers. Dusty's overcome a lot. Some crushing losses when he was manager of the Reds and manager of the Giants. And manager of the Nationals. So to kind of, and I think the Nationals, the way the Nationals unceremoniously dumped him kind of annoyed me. He was the right guy to come in the aftermath of the 2017 scandal, solely because he's one of the guys in baseball that everybody loves. And it's been that way since 1974 when he was standing on the on-deck circle the day Hank Aaron, broke Babe Ruth's all-time record for home runs. And it's been that way in his 50+ years in the game. Like I said, I will never be happy for the World Series trophy to reside in Houston. But I am extremely happy for Dusty Baker to finally get a ring. It's long overdue and it's richly deserved. And sure, Dusty, I'm right with you. You got one or two.
We'll see what happens. He might retire after this. It could be a very interesting thing. We'll talk with management this week on possibly staying there. Oldest manager in the history of the 4 major sports to win a title. The previous person, unfortunately, was another person to beat the Yankees in the World Series, Jack McKeon, back in 2003. All right. My voice can't take anymore, so let's sign off. For Jay Kaplan, I'm Stephen Rabinowitz. Thank you for joining us today and on the Sports Line. We'll be back next time with Anthony Straight in tow. YouTube.com/OnTheSportsLines on demand. Facebook.com/OnTheSportsLines to watch us live. And Jay?
Our Twitter handle is ONTH Sportslines, where you will find a link to this show, if not tonight, sometime tomorrow, along with some other interesting tidbits in the world of sports that we think are worth your time to check out.
How could you be not romantic about this past week in sports? Yep. Again, my voice is done. That's why we're a 2-person show tonight, basically.
And fun, partner.
Thank you to Joe Tufaro, too, for joining us earlier on the show, talking about the local sports team. Enjoy the rest of your second week in November. Good night, everybody.
Hey, Steve. I'm Jay. See ya.
Oh, yeah. I said you're Jay Kaplan already, but see ya.